Hey everyone, and welcome to part 5 of the Handel Improvisation project, a series of videos I'm producing with my fellow YouTube pianist Jonathan Morris, exploring the different ways we can improvise on a single chord progression, in this case one taken from the aria Ombra Mai Fu by the German-British composer George Frederick Handel. If you haven't seen the previous episodes in the series, do check out the playlist, which you'll find linked in the description field right below this video. As well as producing an original recording of the aria with Welsh mezzo-soprano Morgana Warren-Jones, we've already covered 3 styles. Jonathan has covered classical and baroque improvisation, and I've previously talked about adopting the aria into a contemporary pop ballad and improvising on it in that style. Today I'm going to take the chord progression and explore how we might improvise on it in a kind of a slow jazz or maybe kind of cocktaily lounge piano bluesy type style. Let's get going and see what we can do. Now, an interesting thing about jazz is that in some ways it's the style we're looking at that's furthest removed from Handel's own. In particular, what really sets jazz apart is the kind of harmonic language that it uses. If you know anything about jazz, you'll know that it makes a very big deal of using richly extended and embellished chords. You know, says the jazz musician, why play a simple A minor chord when you can play something like A minor 13, or add sharpened ninths or flat 11ths or whatever. It also uses a lot of chord substitutions. Jazz musicians take chords out of progressions and replace them, substitute them with other chords that sounds different but which have the same function. They do the same job as the original chord. The most famous is probably the tritone substitution, which, let's say we're in the key of C major. A tritone substitution would take the G7 chord, the dominant 7th chord that resolves back to the tonic, and replace it with D flat 7, which is a very different, a much kind of richer, cooler sound, but which fulfills the same function and takes us back to the tonic. Now, it's a funny thing, but a lot of pop music uses chords that classical composers would be completely familiar with. If you had a time machine and you brought back Handel or whichever composer from the 18th century to the present, and you took them to a pop gig, you took them to listen to Coldplay or Adele or Justin Bieber or Katy Perry or whoever, Handel would be completely at home with all the harmony that those guys used. The kind of electric instruments and the amps and Justin Bieber's haircut and stuff would probably freak him out a bit, but the chords would be completely familiar. You might remember that in episode 3 of the series, when I was converting Ombra Mai Fu into a pop ballad, although I had to change the structure of the aria and remove quite a lot of the chords, I didn't actually have to change any of them. With jazz, as I say, things are different. Although quite a few classical composers sometimes used chords that we might think of today as jazzy, in effect, when jazz came along, it developed a new harmonic language. In terms of its basic grammar, in terms of tonics and dominants and stuff, that jazzy harmonic language is the same as its classical ancestor and the same as the harmonic language of pop music as well. But it uses a very, very different vocabulary of chords. So let's just have a look at what that means for us if we're going to be giving Ombra Mai Fu the jazz treatment. Okay, so here's that little lead sheet that I put together for tutorial number 3. You might remember that what's gone on here is that I've truncated the aria a little bit and I've shifted it into 4/4 time from the original 3/4. I kept the outline of the original melody and thinned out the chords, so the harmony was more in line with the kind of homophonic style of most pop songs. I was making quite a big fuss about structure and saying the main difference between pop and classical music was their respective approaches to structure and the way they handle musical ideas. Now, it's quite a similar situation for jazz and its derived styles, Jazz tends to use a simpler, more repetitive structure than classical music, and in those terms it's much more closely related to pop. Now, this loop structure that we're using is actually kind of pretty out there and wacky for jazz. Jazz tends, at least kind of reasonably mainstream jazz tends not to use loop structures very much, and especially if we look at the so-called jazz standards, you know, they often have very kind of formal structures, kind of A, B, A, chorus, chorus, middle section, chorus. But this loop will still work. So to save making things more complicated, I've stuck with it for this improvisation. Now look what I've done to the chords. Instead of ordinary F chords, we've got things like F major 7, D minor is D minor 11, we've got B flat major 11, G flat major 7 augmented, and quite a few substitutions. In a couple of places, F over A has become A minor 7, and also there's some quite interesting substitution going on at the end. I've also, by the way, taken out that 2/4 bar, which was giving the pop version its distinctive timing at the end. Yeah, we don't really need that here. So before we talk about these chords, let's actually have a playthrough. Yeah, I'm just using these chords as a starting point. I'll probably play around with them quite a bit when I actually sit down and improvise. But these are the kind of the basic harmonic ideas that I've had for the improvisation. So I'll play through and then we'll have a talk about some of the stuff that's going on harmonically and the particular techniques that I'm using. I'm going to be taking it at a reasonably loose kind of tempo. Yeah, I might kind of use a fair bit of rubato, so you'll probably feel that it's a little bit more, although it won't be super slow, it'll be a little bit more chilled out, a little bit more looser than the quite strict time of the pop improvisation. Let's see what I can come up with. Okay, in a minute I'll pull that improvisation back onto screen and we can work through exactly what I was doing there. But before we do, let's look at some of the underlying theory, starting with the chords. Now, if you're looking carefully, you might have noticed that I actually deviated from the progression that I'd set myself fairly dramatically. That's fine. Once you get going, you can change things. That's the whole point of jazz. But before we talk about exactly what I was doing, let's just remind ourselves of some fundamentals. Now, as I said, one of the most basic things that jazz does is take basic chords like F major and extend them. Now, it does that by, in its most basic form, by stacking thirds on top of the basic chords. So in the key of F, you go from F to F major 7, to F major 9, to F major 11, okay, and you can keep going, F13, whatever. And as things go further out, they can begin to be affected by the context of key. So if you try to play, for example, an F major 11 chord in the key of C major, which doesn't have the B flat, then you either have to borrow that note from outside the key or play the chord as something like F major 7 sharp 11, or however you want to define it, because, you know, defining chords and naming chords begins to get a bit ambiguous once you get that far out. And what about some of the melodic stuff that was going on there? Well, we're in the key of F, so F major is our basic underlying scale. But to create the improvisation, I was borrowing stuff from quite a few other scales. In a few places, I was using that good old standby F pentatonic, which is really just a stripped out major scale. But then a couple of times I dropped in the flat 6, yeah, from this scale, the bebop major scale, you know, because the flat 6 is a very common sound in bop, and also the flat 9th, yeah, the G flat or the F sharp, usually resolving down to the tonic, the F. Another kind of very kind of mid 20th century kind of sound. A couple of times as well, I think I also dropped in the A flat from the F blues scale, maybe E flat as well, but I can't quite remember. Yeah, the thing to do when improvising this kind of thing is avoid the kind of mental process you come across sometimes, which demands learning a bunch of rules and saying to yourself, on a bunch of scales, and saying to yourself, okay, we're in the key of F major and I'm playing a C chord in the left, therefore I can improvise over C mixolydian. Yeah, that's kind of an approach that I think comes from guitar, actually, where you know, guitarists have patterns that they can move up and down the fretboard that facilitate improvisation for them. But you know, as pianists, we don't have to do that. We don't have the problems that guitarists have of locating notes. You know, we've got them right here in front of us on the piano. So the approach to take is to, when you're playing in this kind of style, understand the chord tones that are available to you. So the regular major scale, the flat 6, the flat 9th, the flat 3rd, whatever. Understand what they do, and then use your ear. Okay, a lot of people find that quite kind of freaky, but you know, use your ear to guide you in the improvisation. Okay, if you want, you can even kind of sing along, and I do that sometimes. And you will often find that singing along with your improvisation helps you to get a more natural, a better shape of phrase, as it were. And when you're playing things in this kind of relatively relaxed, cocktaily jazz piano type style, we're not at an up-tempo jazz, where we're not playing things against a really strict beat. You know, you can really play around and have fun with those things and not worry too much about playing the odd bum note. Okay, so having talked about all that, now let's have a quick look at the improvisation again and try to pull out one or two of the things that I've been talking about there. So here we are back at the top of the improvisation. I only actually played the chord progression through a couple of times when I did it, but even so there were quite a few interesting little things to talk about. So let's just run it and chat about some of the stuff that's going on. Okay, let's just look at the right hand there first. What I'm really thinking about here is melodic shaping. Okay, so as I was playing, I was thinking about the notes that I kind of had at my disposal and kind of using my ear and thinking very much in terms of phrasing. Okay, so melodies are made of phrases. Melodies like conversation, yeah, there are starts and stops, there are sentences, there are commas, there are pauses, there are bits where you say a lot all at once and there are bits where you just say a couple of words. And when you're thinking about shaping a melody, thinking about improvising a melody, that's a really important thing to think about. If all you're doing all the time is playing note after note after note after note, that's not ideal, you know, unless it's a really fast kind of show-off improvisation or something. And equally, it needs to be, the phrasing tends to be kind of natural and expressive, and it's about having something to say almost and making it a little bit conversational. Now, at the start there, I was kind of consciously imitating the opening of Ombra Mai Fu, starting on the C there, holding it and moving downwards, as the original melody in the aria does. Then I began to deviate from that quite a lot, obviously, and some characteristic jazzy notes started to come in. So I used the flat 3rd and the flat 7th quite a lot, okay, resolving them both up and down to natural notes of the scale. And then I also came to the flat 9th, which I use in that kind of very characteristic kind of mid-20th century jazz kind of way, drop down from the C to the flat 9th, down to the C below it. Let's just hear that little bit again. Run upwards, flat 9th down to the C, okay? And again, little pauses, little breaks, and they're my commas and the full stops in what I'm saying, okay? In the left hand, things are reasonably kind of plain vanilla, really. And I'm actually playing some of the chords in simpler forms than I put in the chord progression. So for example, in the chord progression, that chord there I actually scored as D minor 11, and I'm not actually throughout the improvisation using the full D minor 11, maybe hardly at all. In fact, that would be the D minor chord with the E and the D, or aspects of it. Yeah, mostly I just came back to the D minor 7 sound. And here, this is one of the things I play where there's a C9 shape. Okay, so if you've got one of these extended chords like 9ths, 11ths and so on, it can be difficult to play all the notes of the chord in one hand. Yeah, so here I have actually got the full C9 because I'm playing the right, the C in the right there, but only briefly. Mostly we're focusing on this shape here, and I'm omitting the C. Yeah, I'm keeping the D in there, the 9th, because that's kind of what gives it its characteristics. If I played C, E, G, B flat, I'd just have a C7 chord. Yeah, so I'm missing out the root of the chord, and it functions the same. It still has the same kind of sound that I'm after. Then later on in the left, there we go. Where am I coming to? That's my, so I play that. That is supposed to be a C9 chord, and that's where we get the C9 over B flat in the original progression. But I've, is that an inversion of a C9 chord with an added F, or have I actually substituted the C9 for a G minor 7 chord? Does it really matter? Similar sort of sound, similar sort of function. Yeah, and the most important thing is that for me it allows me to go easily down to that B flat, which is, as I said in the pop tutorial, one of the really distinctive sounds of this progression. And I didn't want to go completely away from Handel. Okay, so using that shape gave me an interesting sound and allowed me to drop down to the B flat easily. But was it C9? Was it G minor 7? Who really cares? Okay, let's move on. There's that flat 9. Oh, that's the, by the way, that's an A minor 11 chord there. Okay, I've just dropped in. Sounds quite cool, very distinctive kind of jazzy sound. I hang about on that quite a lot actually, because it's so, boom, yeah, nice. Bit of a grace note. And again another A minor 11, but in a slightly different inversion there. Okay, and again, listen to the grammar of what's going on in the right there. I use a little bit of staccato there, a little bit of jumping around. I'm shaping it musically. I know I always go on about this, but I'm thinking about my dynamics. I've grown from relatively soft to something a bit louder. I'm going to come back down again. Let's just hear this again. There we go, staccato bit. Bit of pedal to support that, yeah. And notice how I was kind of making the most of some of these cool chords that I've dropped in here. Let's just hear them, hear some of them again. There's that G flat 7 chord, really nice sound. And I do like that A sus chord, which actually has quite an interesting kind of modern jazz sound actually, which I think is kind of cool. Let's listen to it again. I'm not trying to dress it up in any way. I'm just using it as a kind of passing chord that gets me in an interesting way to that B flat major 7. There we go, dead simple. And there's our sustain pedal holding that down. Back to some melody in the right. Notice every now and then I'm just using little rhythmic stabs in the left there, just to create a little bit of interest. I slightly mistimed that one. I find that quite annoying. You might not even have noticed it, but it's just fractionally out. It just doesn't quite work. Let's hear it again. Yeah, but the second one came in just a bit early, maybe. More complex runs. Okay, notice that again I'm dropping in these flat ninths a little bit here. Yeah. It's kind of difficult to describe, but as melodic improvisation gets more complex and quicker, you've got to be careful, because you get onto autopilot more and it's harder to use your ear, and you start to become reliant on just what's falling under your fingers, as it were, and that's when it can kind of lose the melodic focus, and it just becomes kind of a string of notes. Yeah, just something to watch out for there, because certainly that is what happens to me often. Okay, and just becoming a bit richer, a bit more complex in the left there. Just listen again to the kind of the musical effects I'm after there, the varying dynamics, the staccato. Playing the piano is not, improvising on the piano is not just about choosing the right note, it's about playing it in the right way. There we go, stab, nice. And there, okay. So again, look at the contrast. I'm getting more kind of chordal playing here, but I'm still using kind of dynamic variation. So that's quite a bold thing to do. Well, not bold, but kind of quite startling. You know, stab, fingers, hands right off the keyboard, straight on, but much softer. Yeah, a very, very kind of distinctive musical effect there. Boom, ba, yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of a bit of a boring run there. Again, that was one where I wasn't really thinking about the melody. I was just playing something that I found comfortable, but it got me where I wanted to go. Okay, and just finish there on that. What's that? That is kind of an F11 or an F9 with an added sixth or something. A very kind of distinctive jazzy chord, quite a cool sound. So there we go. As usual, I'm harping on about the importance not just of choosing the right notes, but of getting the right sound, and of using the kind of grammar and the vocabulary and the musicality of it. Yeah, if anything, that's more important, much more important than just choosing the right notes. Same was true for Handel. Same was true in the pop stuff. Same is true for jazzy styles like this. Okay, so that's about it for this episode of the Handel Improvisation Project. Both Jonathan and I are really pleased with the feedback we're getting so far. It's great that you guys are enjoying watching and listening to this stuff as much as we're enjoying making it. It's been kind of a real learning experience, certainly for me, you know, really, really interesting. Anyway, the next episode will be out in a few days' time, and it will be Jonathan in classical mode again, talking about improvising in a kind of romantic style, redolent of Chopin, if you like. So keep an eye on the playlist, remember the links below in the description, subscribe to both our channels, and don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with what's going on. All the links are right underneath in the description field. I'll see you very soon.